Wind scoured Iron Hollow's dusty square like a whetted blade. Abigail Hart, Judge Silas Hart's only daughter, stood lashed to the heavy rear wheel of a freight wagon, thick rope biting into her arms. Cruel laughter echoed off false-fronted buildings as three men, Cooper, Vance, and the sneering young Deputy Hale, circled her. Tears carved tracks through the grime on Abigail's broad, defiant face. Across the rutted street, Elias Kane, hollowed by grief and the weight of his three motherless children, watched from his battered wagon. What duty calls a broken man to defy a town's cruel sport? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. The Wyoming sky, vast and pitiless as a forgotten god, pressed down on Iron Hollow. Late afternoon sun bled crimson and ochre across the high plains, gilding the dust that perpetually hung in the air above the town. It settled on Abigail Hart's skin like a second layer of shame, gritty and inescapable. The rope binding her thick wrists to the iron rim of Jedediah Cobb's freight wagon wasn't tight enough to cut off circulation, only tight enough to humiliate, to pinion her large frame against the unforgiving wood. Each twist of her body, each attempt to find a scrap of dignity, only made the rough hemp saw deeper, imprinting its cruel signature onto her flesh. Look at the prize heifer, boys. Vance Ritter's voice, whiskey roughened and thick with malice, cut through the brittle air. He spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed perilously close to Abigail's worn leather boot. Judge's daughter, tied up prettier than a Christmas goose. Reckon the old man will pay a ransom. He nudged Cooper Briggs, whose beefy shoulders shook with silent, mirthless laughter. Deputy Hale, younger and leaner but with eyes like chips of flint, leaned against the wagon's side, a smirk playing on his lips. He didn't laugh outright, but his silence was a heavier condemnation. Abigail kept her chin lifted, staring straight ahead at the false front of the mercantile across the square. Don't let them see. The mantra beat in time with her thudding heart. Don't let them see the cracks. But the cracks were everywhere. They were in the way the coarse rope abraded her skin, a physical echo of the constant abrasion of their words. Slow, clumsy, too much, not enough. They were in the familiar sting of tears she refused to shed, blurring the harsh lines of the mercantile sign. They were in the aching absence where her mother's gentle strength should have been, a void filled only by her father's cold disapproval and the town's relentless scorn. Her size, an undeniable fact of her existence, had become their weapon, her sharp tongue in defense of the vulnerable, like old Mrs. Peabody last week when Vance tried to shortchange her at the feed store, their justification. The square wasn't deserted. Men lingered in the shade of the saloon porch, faces obscured by hat brims. Women hurried past on the boardwalk, eyes averted, baskets clutched tight. Children pointed, then were swiftly hushed and dragged away. Complicity hung thicker than the dust. Iron Hollow breathed indifference. Abigail knew their thoughts. Judge Hart's problem. The loud, difficult girl who wouldn't stay quiet, wouldn't shrink. Serves her right for speaking out of turn, for taking up too much space. Even the wind seemed to hiss it through the sagebrush scratching at the town's edges. The grand house on the low rise overlooking the town, her father's house, stood silent and shuttered. No help would come from there. Justice in Iron Hollow wore her father's stern face and looked the other way. A low groan of wood and the rhythmic clop of weary hooves broke the oppressive quiet from the eastern end of the main street. A weathered farm wagon, its canvas cover patched and sun-bleached, lumbered into the square. Elias Kane held the reins loosely in calloused hands, the leather worn smooth by worry and work. The lines around his eyes, etched deep by sun and sorrow, seemed carved from the same weathered oak as his wagon bench. Beside him, perched like small, solemn birds, sat his daughters, 8-year-old Lottie, her dark braids neat, her eyes wide and observant, clutching a worn cloth doll missing an arm, and 6-year-old Maisie, a whirlwind momentarily stilled, her thumb hovering near her mouth. In the wagon bed, amid sacks of seed corn and a single crated chicken, 10-year-old Ben sat with his knees drawn up, trying to look older than his years, his gaze fixed on the distant purple haze mountains. Iron Hollow meant necessity, salt, flour, a length of chain for the forge Elias kept barely functioning on his hardscrabble claim 10 miles out. It meant facing the stares, the poorly concealed pity, the awkward silences that followed the mention of his wife, Sarah. 2 winters gone. Consumption had taken her, a slow, cruel theft that left Elias hollowed out, a bellows with no fire to feed. The grief was a constant companion, a weight strapped across his shoulders heavier than any anvil. He navigated the world through its lens, every sunrise a reminder of her absence, every childish cry a phantom echo of her comfort. He moved through his days, tending the meager crops, shoeing the occasional horse, caring for his children, with the mechanical precision of a clock winding down. The vibrant colors of life muted the shades of ochre and gray. He saw the gathering near Cobb's wagon first, a knot of trouble. His instinct, honed by loss and the fierce, vulnerable love for his children, was to veer wide, to get his supplies and retreat to the fragile sanctuary of his homestead. But Lottie's small hand suddenly gripped his forearm. "Pa, what's they doing to that lady?" Her voice, clear and unafraid, cut through his weary fog. Elias's gaze followed hers. He saw the bound figure, the mocking circle of men. He saw Abigail Hart. Recognition flickered, distant and impersonal. The judge's daughter, the one folks whispered about, pointed at. He'd seen her once, months ago, arguing fiercely with a mercantile owner over the price of calico, her voice resonant, her stance unyielding. He'd admired her spirit then, a fleeting spark in the monotony of his grief. Now, that spirit was being publicly crushed. A memory, sharp as a shard of glass, pierced him. Sarah, pale and frail in their bed, her hand clutching his with surprising strength. "You see someone hurting, Elias Kane," she'd whispered, her breath a thin thread. "You don't leave them to bleed. Not ever." Her words, a quiet oath sworn in the shadowed room, burned in his chest now, brighter than the setting sun glinting off the wagon wheel's iron rim. Deputy Hale's laugh, cold and sharp, reached Elias's ears. Vance Ritter made an elaborate bow towards Abigail, sweeping his hat off with mock gallantry. The sight ignited a slow, cold fury within Elias, cutting to the fog of his grief like a winter wind. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a desecration. Of her, of decency, of the memory of the woman who had believed in helping. "Stay here," Elias murmured, his voice gravelly but firm. He handed the reins to Ben, meeting his son's questioning, slightly fearful gaze. "Hold them steady, son. Watch your sisters." He didn't wait for Ben's nod. He swung down from the wagon bench, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a thud that felt louder than it was. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, the measured tread of a man walking towards something he couldn't avoid. His blacksmith's frame, broad and still powerful despite the gauntness grief had imposed, carried him across the rutted street. The townsmen, engrossed in their sport, didn't notice his approach until he was almost upon them. "That's enough," Elias stated. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the unyielding weight of stone. It cut through their laughter like a blade. Vance Ritter spun around, his sneer faltering momentarily into surprise. Cooper Briggs straightened up, his hand instinctively drifting towards the gun at his hip. Deputy Hale pushed off from the wagon, his smirk replaced by a watchful coldness. "This ain't your concern, Kane," Hale said, his voice flat. "Just a bit of harmless fun. Judge's girl got a mite too mouthy, needed reminding of her place." "Her place ain't tied to a wagon wheel," Elias replied, his gaze fixed not on the deputy, but on the rope biting into Abigail's wrists. He saw the raw skin, the tremor she was trying to suppress in her bound arms. He saw the fierce, wounded pride in her eyes, the tears she refused to let fall. It mirrored the desolation he carried within himself, a kinship of pain he hadn't sought but recognized instantly. "Says who?" Vance stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "You gonna make us blacksmith? Or you just missing your woman and looking for any stray heifer?" The insult hung in the air, poisonous. Elias felt the old, dangerous heat rise in his blood, the heat he'd banked in Sarah's death. He took a single step towards Vance, his large hands clenching at his sides. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes, the sudden, predatory stillness in his posture, was answer enough. Vance's bluster evaporated. He took an involuntary step back, bumping into Cooper. Hale's hand rested lightly on his holstered pistol. "Walk away, Kane. This don't involve you. The judge won't take kindly to interference." Elias ignored him. He turned his back on the man, a deliberate act of dismissal that was more dangerous than any threat. He focused solely on Abigail. Her breath hitched as he approached, a flicker of fear warring with defiance in her eyes. He saw the pulse beating wildly at the base of her throat. Without a word, he drew the heavy belt knife he carried for practical tasks. Cutting rope, trimming hose. The blade caught the dying light. He saw her flinch, bracing herself. "Easy now," Elias murmured, his voice dropping to a low, steady register meant only for her. It was a tone he used with a spooked horse or a child waking from a nightmare. "Just cutting you loose." He moved slowly, telegraphing his actions. The blade slid between her wrist and the rough hemp. One clean slice, then another. The rope fell away, coiling on the dust like a dead snake. Abigail gasped, stumbling forward as the support vanished. Instinctively, Elias caught her elbow, steadying her. She was solid, substantial, her weight a surprising anchor against his own sense of drifting. Her skin was warm where his hand touched her bare forearm above the raw rope burn. She jerked her arm back as if scalded, her cheeks flaming crimson beneath the dust and tear tracks. Shame radiated from her in palpable waves, hotter than the sun-baked earth. "Don't," she whispered, the word choked. "Don't touch me." Her eyes darted past him to the watching men, to the faces peering from windows and doorways. The humiliation was a living thing, coiling tighter than the rope had been. "Need to get you clear," Elias said, keeping his voice low. He positioned himself deliberately between her and the townsman, his broad back a shield. He felt their hostile stares prickling against his skin, heard Vance's muttered curse. He didn't look back. His focus was on Abigail's shattered dignity, on the tremors running through her frame. "My wagon's yonder. Can you walk?" Abigail hesitated, her gaze sweeping the hostile square, landing briefly on the silent, watching children in the farm wagon. Lottie's wide, solemn eyes, Maisie's thumb now firmly in her mouth, Ben's anxious frown. Something flickered in Abigail's expression, a spark of vulnerability, a dawning awareness of an audience beyond her tormentors. She gave a tiny, jerky nod, wrapping her arms protectively around herself, covering the angry red marks on her wrists. "Then walk," Elias said. He didn't offer his arm again, respecting her recoil, but stayed close, a solid, silent presence at her side as he guided her across the exposed expanse of the square towards his wagon. Each step felt measured, witnessed. The dust puffed beneath their feet, the weight of Iron Hollow's judgment pressed down, colder now than the fading sunlight. Vance spat again, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. Hale's expression was unreadable, but his eyes tracked their progress with unnerving intensity. Reaching the wagon, Elias helped Abigail climb stiffly into back beside the seed sacks and crate holding the single, clucking hen. She sank down, folding in on herself, making her large frame seem strangely small, trying to disappear amidst the rough burlap. Elias climbed onto the bench, taking the reins from Ben. The children were silent, their eyes huge as they stared at the woman huddled behind them, her face hidden by a curtain of tangled, dusty hair. "Pa," Ben whispered, his voice tight with apprehension. "It's all right, son," Elias said, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. He clicked to the team, turning the wagon in a wide arc away from the square, away from the silent, staring men, away from Judge Hart's imposing, indifferent house on the hill. The shadows were lengthening now. stretching long, distorted fingers across the land as they headed east, toward the open range and the dubious safety of his homestead. The air felt charged, brittle. The rescue felt less like an end and more like the first step onto perilous ground. Lottie, unable to contain herself, twisted around on the bench. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" she asked Abigail, her voice small but clear. Abigail didn't answer. She kept her face turned away, towards the vast, darkening plains. Elias focused on the road ahead. The ruts familiar, yet suddenly treacherous. The silence in the wagon was thick, broken only by the creak of wood, the jingle of harness, the rhythmic plod of the horses, and the frantic beating of his own heart. He scanned the deepening twilight, the skeletal outlines of sagebrush, the looming shapes of distant rock formations. His hand tightened on the reins. What had he just pulled his children into? He saw it then, just as they reached the last rise before the open trail leading home. A movement, low and swift, near a cluster of boulders off to the south. Not an animal. The silhouette of a man on horseback, stark against the bruised purple of the evening sky. Watching, motionless. The horse shifted, a dark shape against the fading light. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the rider melted back into the gathering gloom. Elias felt a cold finger trace its way down his spine. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The dust of Iron Hollow clung to them, and it tasted like trouble. The homestead hunkered low against the encroaching Wyoming night, a silhouette of weathered timber and stubborn endurance etched against the bruised purple sky. Elias Kane guided the weary wagon down the final rutted track. The creak of wood and jingle of harness, the only sounds louder than the frantic drumming in his chest. The image of the lone rider, a shadow coalesced and dissolved near the boulders, clung to him like a burr. Watching, always watching. Abigail Hart sat rigid in the wagon bed, a dark shape amidst the seed sacks, her face turned resolutely away from the children who stole furtive glances over their shoulders. The dust of Iron Hollow, thick with malice and indifference, seemed a tangible shroud around them. Elias pulled up beside the low-roof cabin, its single window a dark eye reflecting the last embers of sunset. Beyond it, the skeletal shape of the smithy stood, the coal forge a gaping maw. "Ben," Elias said, his voice rough but low, "water the team, slow and steady mind. Lottie, Maisie inside. Get the lamp lit." His orders were calm, belying the vigilance that kept his gaze sweeping the surrounding sagebrush flats, the jagged teeth of the distant buttes. Every rustle, every shift of shadow felt amplified, charged with threat. The children scrambled down, Ben taking the reins with solemn responsibility, the girls darting toward the cabin door like frightened rabbits. Elias turned to Abigail. She hadn't moved. In the deepening gloom, she was a monument to shame, her shoulders hunched as if bearing the weight of the entire town's scorn. "Ma'am," Elias began, unsure. The formality felt strange, inadequate. "You're welcome to come inside. Rest a spell." Abigail flinched at the word welcome. Slowly, painfully, she turned. Her face, pale beneath the grime and tear tracks, was a mask of profound exhaustion. The fierce defiance he glimpsed in the square was banked, smothered by humiliation and a bone-deep weariness. Her eyes, dark pools reflecting the dying light, flickered towards the dark cabin, then back to him. "Why?" The single word was a rasp, scraped raw. "Why bring me here? You don't know me. You don't know what they'll do." Her gaze darted past him, scanning the darkening landscape, expecting pursuit. Elias shifted his weight. Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, clear as creek water over stones. "You don't leave someone to bleed." But it wasn't just bleeding he'd seen on Abigail Hart. It was a soul being flayed alive. "Saw someone tied down," he said simply, meeting her wary gaze. "Saw folks letting it happen. Ain't right." He paused, the image of the watching rider sharp in his mind. "And wherever they were planning you'd be next, reckon it weren't good." A shudder ran through Abigail. She looked down at her wrists. The angry red welled stark against her skin in the fading light. The rope burns were a physical echo of the invisible bindings that had always constrained her in Iron Hollow. Her size, her outspokenness, her father's icy disregard. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Her mother, Eleanor, years ago, kneeling before the cold hearth in her grand house, her face gaunt with illness but her eyes fierce. "You hold your head high, Abigail," she'd whispered, her voice a thread of silk and steel. "Don't you ever let them make you small. Not for him. Not for anyone." Eleanor Hart had died defying the town's whispers about her nervous condition, leaving Abigail alone with a judge who saw her only as an inconvenient reminder of a wife he'd failed to control. Now, tied to a wagon wheel, she felt terrifyingly small. Swallowing hard, Abigail pushed herself up. Her movements were stiff, heavy with a residue of fear and the awkwardness of her large frame in confined space. She accepted Elias's offered hand this time, her touch hesitant, fleeting, as she climbed down. The ground felt unstable beneath her feet. Inside, the cabin was a testament to hard work and harder loss. A rough-hewn table dominated the single room, flanked by two benches. A cold stone hearth occupied one wall, a worn rocking chair beside it, Sarah's chair. Elias saw Abigail's gaze linger on it for a heartbeat. Lottie had lit the kerosene lamp on the table, its warm, smoky light pushing back the shadows, revealing patched quilts on rope beds in the corner, shelves holding sparse provisions, and a lingering scent of wood smoke and leather. Maisie hovered near the hearth, thumb back in her mouth, while Lottie watched Abigail with solemn, unblinking curiosity. "Pa says you can sit," Lottie offered softly, gesturing towards one of the benches. Abigail hesitated, acutely aware of her dusty dress, her disheveled hair, the sheer space she occupied in this intimate, grieving home. She felt like an intruder, a storm cloud blown into a quiet valley. Slowly, she sank onto the bench, folding her hands in her lap, hiding the rope burns. The lamplight flickered over her face, carving hollows beneath her eyes. Elias busied himself with the mundane, banking the small fire Lottie had started in the hearth, filling the tin coffee pot from the water bucket. The routine was a shield against the strangeness, against the weight of the woman sitting silently at his table and the danger he'd likely invited. He felt Sarah's absence like a physical ache, a constant companion. He remembered her laughter filling this room, her hands deftly mending clothes, her gentle touch calming a feverish child. This act of sheltering a stranger felt like a betrayal of that sacred memory, yet also, somehow, a desperate clinging to the compassion she had embodied. What would she think? The question gnawed at him. Risking the children for pride? For justice? Iron Hollow had precious little of either. Ben came in, stamping dust from his boots. He glanced at Abigail, then quickly away, his young face troubled. Horses are seen to Pa. He stood awkwardly near the door, radiating unease. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the mournful sigh of the wind outside. Abigail stared at the worn wood grain of the table. The sheer, unexpected kindness of being inside, of being offered a seat, was almost as disorienting as the cruelty in the square. Iron Hollow had taught her to expect scorn or indifference, not shelter. She risked a glance at Lottie. The girl was carefully arranging 3 smooth river stones on the table. One gray, one white, one streaked with rust red. A tiny collection, precious in its simplicity. "Found 'em by the creek," Lottie murmured, catching Abigail's look. "They're their company." She pushed the white stone slightly towards Abigail. A tiny, wordless offering. Something fragile shifted within Abigail. A memory surfaced, not her mother, but of herself as a child, collecting wildflowers ignored by the other girls, finding solace in their transient beauty. A lump formed in her throat. She touched the cool surface of the white stone with a fingertip. "Thank you," she whispered. The words rusted from disuse. Elias set a chipped mug of hot coffee before her. "It ain't much," he said gruffly, "but it's warm." He didn't sit, preferring to lean against the hearth, his posture taut, listening to the night sounds beyond the thin walls. The image of the rider wouldn't leave him. Who? Hale? One of Ritter's cronies? Sent by the judge himself? Abigail wrapped her hands around the mug, the heat seeping into her chill bones. The simple act felt grounding. She took a sip, the bitter brew a shock to her system. My father, she began, her voice barely above the fire's crackle. She stared into the dark liquid. Judge Silas Hart. He won't let this stand. Him being made a fool of, or me being taken. The word taken tasted like ash. He controls Iron Hollow. The law, the land, the likes of Vance Ritter. They do his bidding. She paused, a bitter twist to her mouth, especially when it involves putting me in my place, reminding everyone, including me, that I'm just the judge's burden. Why? The question came from Ben, his voice tight with a boy's need to understand injustice. Why'd they tie you up? Just 'cause you're? He trailed off, flushing, unable to articulate the judgment the whole town levied. Abigail met his gaze, seeing not malice, but confusion. Because I spoke, she said flatly. Last week, Vance Ritter was cheating old man Peabody on a grain order. Short-weighted him, blatant as daylight. Peabody's half-blind and scared. I called Vance out, right there in the mercantile, told everyone what he was doing. A spark of her old fire flickered in her eyes, quickly dampened. Vince didn't like being shamed by... She gestured vaguely at herself, the unspoken words hanging heavy. By someone like me. Guess this was his answer. And Deputy Hale, her voice hardened. He enjoys enforcing the judge's particular kind of order, keeping the undesirables quiet. She looked directly at Elias. You made yourself an undesirable today, Mr. Kane. Elias absorbed this. The pieces clicked into a grim picture. Not random cruelty, but targeted punishment meted out by the judge's enforcers. His intervention hadn't just rescued Abigail. It had directly challenged Silas Hart's authority. The cold finger traced his spine again. He thought of his children, asleep in their beds, vulnerable. What protection did a lone blacksmith have against a corrupt judge and his thugs? The night deepened. Abigail, moved by a complex mix of gratitude and a desperate need to do something, silently rose and began clearing the empty mugs. Her movements were careful, almost reverent, in the small space. Lottie watched, then shyly brought her a damp cloth. Together, wordlessly, they wiped the worn table. It was a small thing, insignificant, yet in the lamplight, it felt like a fragile bridge being built across a chasm of pain and isolation. Maisie, emboldened, brought Abigail her worn cloth doll, holding out mutely. Abigail accepted it with a gentleness that surprised herself, tucking it momentarily beside her on the bench. Elias watched the interaction, a strange tightness in his chest that wasn't entirely grief. It was something else, something fragile and unexpected stirring in the ruins of his heart. Later, Elias insisted Abigail take the small trundle bed usually reserved for when one of the children was sick. He would sleep on the floor near the door, his rifle close at hand. The children settled into their shared bed, the cabin filled with the soft sounds of their breathing. Abigail lay stiffly on the narrow cot, the unfamiliar rough sheets scratchy against her skin. The profound silence of the prairie pressed in, so different from the tense, watchful quiet of her father's large, empty house. Here, the silence felt shared, guarded, but shared. She clutched the small white stone Lottie had given her, its smooth surface cool against her palm, a tiny anchor in the storm. Elias sat with his back against the door, the rifle across his knees. He stared into the dying embers of the hearth, listening to the wind moan around the eaves. He thought of Sarah, her gentle strength. Would this be helping or inviting ruin? The image of the rider haunted him. Had they been followed? Was the homestead being watched even now? He strained his ears, hearing only the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. Exhaustion pulled at him, a heavy tide, but fear was a sharper goad. He wouldn't sleep. Couldn't. Just before dawn, a sound shattered the fragile peace. Not the wind, not an animal. A distinct, rhythmic thump-thump against the cabin's stout wooden door. Like a fist pounding, but slower, heavier, deliberate. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle raised, his heart hammering against his ribs. Abigail sat bolt upright on the trundle bed, her eyes wide with terror in the gray pre-dawn light, filtering through the window. The children stirred, murmuring in their sleep, sensing the sudden electric tension. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't an attack. It was the message, a warning. Elias moved silently, cautiously to the small, thick glass window beside the door. He peered out into the murky half-light. No one stood at the door. He scanned the yard, the smithy, the line of sagebrush leading toward the rise. Nothing moved. He gestured sharply for Abigail and the children to stay back. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he lifted the heavy wooden latch and pulled the door open just a crack, rifle barrel angled low and ready. No one charged. No shot rang out. The cool dawn air rushed in, smelling of dust and dew. Nailed squarely to the center of the rough-hewn door, its parchment stark white against the weathered wood, was a single sheet of paper. Elias stared at it, the cold dread solidifying in his gut. He knew, without reading it, what it represented. Iron Hollow's answer. The judge's reach. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly despite himself, and pulled the nail free. He unfolded the paper, the rustle unnaturally loud in the stillness. The message was brief, written in a sharp, authoritative hand he recognized from legal notices posted in the town square. It bore no signature. None was needed. The words, stark and brutal in the gray light, seemed to burn themselves onto his retinas. Abigail Hart, wanted for disorderly conduct and public indecency, returned to Iron Hollow for judgment. Harboring a fugitive is a hanging offense. Elias Kane, consider your children. The paper crumpled in his fist. The silence after the pounding was infinitely more terrifying. The vast Wyoming dawn stretched out before them, beautiful and utterly merciless. The fragile sanctuary of the homestead was shattered. The law, Silas Hart's law, had found them, and it had named its price. Elias looked back into the cabin, meeting Abigail's terrified eyes, then the sleepy, confused faces of his children just beginning to stir. The cold weight of the threat settled over him like a shroud. They were trapped, cornered, and the noose, it seemed, was already being measured. The crumpled note in Elias's fist felt like a live coal, burning with the cold fire of Judge Silas Hart's authority. The stark words, disorderly conduct, public indecency, hanging offense, consider your children, echoed in the pre-dawn gloom of the cabin, louder than the fading thump that had delivered them. Abigail sat frozen on the trundle bed, the fragile sense of sanctuary shattered, replaced by a familiar, suffocating dread. The white stone Lottie had given her dug into her clenched palm, a tiny, hard point of reality. Elias met her wide, terrified eyes, then looked at his children, stirring now, blinking sleepily in the gray light filtering through the small window. Ben sat up first, his face pinched with confusion that quickly sharpened into fear as he saw his father's expression, the rifle held rigidly at his side. "Pa!" Ben's voice was thin. Maisie whimpered, burrowing deeper under quilt. Lottie stared, her dark eyes fixed on the crumpled paper. Elias forced a breath past the constriction in his throat. He couldn't let the terror take root. Not here. Not now. He shoved the note into his pocket, the paper rustling like dry leaves, a sound of finality. "Get dressed," he said, his voice low but firm, cutting through the brittle silence. "All of you, quick and quiet." He moved to the door, peering out to the crack again, scanning the yard, the smithy, the pale expanse of sagebrush leading towards the rise. The land lay still, bathed in the deceptive peace of dawn, but the stillness felt watchful, charged. The rider hadn't just delivered a message. He marked the place. Abigail moved mechanically, her limbs heavy with a leaden fear. Dressing felt like donning armor against an unseen enemy. Every rustle of fabric, every creak of the floorboard seemed amplified. She avoided the small, tarnished mirror hanging near the wash basin, unwilling to confront the reflection of the woman branded a fugitive. Shame warred with a burgeoning defiance. Disorderly? Indecent? For speaking truth? For existing in a body the town deemed unacceptable? The injustice of it, wrapped in the cold legalese of her father's decree, ignited a slow, cold fury beneath the fear. She touched the simple silver locket hidden beneath her dress, her mother Eleanor's, containing a single, faded lock of chestnut hair. Hold your head high, her mother's ghost seemed to whisper. Don't let them make you small. But how high could she hold it with a noose dangling? Elias moved with grim efficiency. He checked the rifle, ensured his heavy blacksmith's hammer lay near the hearth, and began shifting sacks of grain and seed against the cabin's lower walls. A feeble barricade, but better than nothing. His mind raced, a frantic calculation of risk and resource. 10 miles to Iron Hollow. 10 miles of open country, where Hale and Ritter could easily intercept them. Nowhere else to run. His claim was an island in a vast, indifferent sea. He thought of Sarah, her unwavering belief in helping the wounded. Would she see this as courage or reckless endangerment of their children? The guilt was a familiar ache, sharpened now by the explicit threat against Ben, Lottie, Maisie. Consider your children. The words were a knife twisting in the wound of his loss. Protecting them was his only compass. Yet here he stood, harboring a storm that threatened to sweep them all away. He glanced at Abigail, struggling to pin up her hair with trembling fingers. She looked lost, adrift. He couldn't abandon her now. The act had been committed. The consequences were barreling towards them regardless. Turning her out wouldn't save them. It would only confirm Hart's absolute power. The day unfolded under a taut wire of tension. Elias worked outside, his senses stretched thin, scanning the horizon constantly. He tended the smoldering forge, the familiar rhythm of pumping the bellows and the hiss of hot metal a temporary anchor. He needed functional tools, yes, but the heat, the sparks, the shaping of stubborn iron. It was defiance, resilience hammered into form. He checked the perimeter, noting disturbed earth near the corral fence, likely from a messenger's horse. No tracks led directly away. The rider had been careful, circling back into the wilderness. Inside, Abigail found purpose in small tasks. She helped Lottie tidy the beds, the simple act of smoothing rough blankets a grounding ritual. She showed Maisie how to knead dough for the noon biscuits, the child's small, sticky hands working alongside her own larger ones. The physicality of it, the shared focus, eased a tight knot of fear in her chest. Fractionally, Ben hovered near the window, a small, self-appointed sentry, his expression far too old for his years. He kept glancing at Abigail, curiosity warring with the fear instilled by the dawn's intrusion. "Ma'am!" Ben finally ventured during the quiet lull after the meager noon meal. He fiddled with a worn leather strap. "Your pa, the judge, why is he so?" He struggled for the word, frowning. "Why is he against you?" Abigail flinched. The question, innocent yet piercing, laid bare the central, agonizing mystery. She looked down at the dough clinging to her fingers. The memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Her father's study, years ago, the air thick with pipe smoke and disapproval. She'd been 15, already taller and broader than the other girls, her voice too loud in the quiet room. She'd argued passionately for old man Finch, wrongly accused of stealing a saddle by Vance Ritter's father. Silas Hart had listened, his face granted, then coldly dismissed her. Sentimentality clouds judgment, Abigail. Stick to your embroidery. Leave matters of law to those equipped to understand them. The dismissal had been absolute, laced with contempt for her mind and her form. Her mother had been ill then, her gentle voice too weak to counter the judge's icy decree. Doesn't like reminders, Abigail said slowly, choosing her words carefully for boy. She wiped her hands on her apron. Reminders that the world isn't always neat, like his law books. Or that people... She paused, touching a hidden locket. That people can be loud or take up space or see things differently, especially his own daughter. She met Ben's troubled gaze, especially when she sees the cracks in the things he's built, like Vance Ritter's cheating, exposed publicly, an insult to the judge's carefully constructed order, where men like Ritter were useful tools, their minor transgressions overlooked. Her defiance had been a chisel striking that facade. Later, while Elias repaired a harness strap outside, Abigail gathered water from the well. The rhythmic creak of the bucket winding up was a lonely sound in the vast afternoon silence. As she turned, pail heavy in her hands, she saw movement near the smithy. Not Elias, a figure half hidden by the forge's bulky outline. Her breath hitched. Deputy Hale? But the figure stepped cautiously forward. It was Jed Cobb, the grizzled owner of the freight line, whose wagon will she been tied to. His face was weathered leather, his eyes darting nervously toward the cabin, then back toward the trail to town. He held no weapon, only a worn hat clutched in his hands. "Miss Hart," Cobb muttered, his voice low and gravelly. He glanced over his shoulder again. "Ain't staying. Just wanted to say, what they done, Vance and them, tying you up, weren't right." He shuffled his feet, unable to meet her eyes fully. "Hale, he's got orders from the judge, stirring things up, looking for something. An excuse." Abigail's pulse quickened. "An excuse for what, Mr. Cobb?" Cobb shook his head, his expression grim. "Don't know specifics. But it ain't just about you counting Vance out, though that riled him plenty. The judge, he's been restless, like something's gnawing at him. Talk is he needs something settled. Permanent. You being difficult, give him cause. Public cause." He looked directly at her now, his eyes pleading. "Be careful, Mississippi Cane too. They ain't just blowing smoke. Hale's got men watching. Saw him near the East Ridge." He tipped his hat, a jerky motion. "Didn't see me." He turned and melted back around the smithy, disappearing as quickly as he'd come. Abigail stood frozen, the heavy pail forgotten in her hands, stirring things up, looking for an excuse. Something settled, permanent. Cobb's words weren't just a warning. They were a chilling glimpse into machinery of her father's malice. It wasn't just punishment. It was preparation. For what? Her heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to tell Elias. As dusk bled into the sky, staining it bruised purple and orange, the tension within the cabin thickened like stew left too long on the fire. Elias had secured the shutters as best he could, leaving only narrow slits for sight lines. The rifle leaned against the wall near the door. Abigail had shared Cobb's ominous words, and Elias's face had darkened, the lines around his eyes etching deeper. He'd merely nodded, a grim acceptance settling over him. The threat had shape now, and it was closing in. Lottie, sensing the adult's fear, approached Abigail. She held out a small, crudely carved wooden horse, its form softened by handling. "Pa made it," she whispered. "For Maisie, but she's scared of horses since..." She trailed off, unable to voice a memory of their mother's accident involving the spook mare. "You can hold it? For luck." The offering, a piece of Elias's craftsmanship born from grief, offered to Abigail for comfort, was profoundly moving. Abigail took the small horse, its smooth wood warm from Lottie's hand. "Thank you, Lottie," she murmured, her voice thick. It's a brave horse." She saw the flicker of a smile touch the girl's lips. The fragile connection, woven from shared fear and small kindnesses, felt like the only warmth in the encroaching chill. Elias paced the small confines of the room, a caged predator. His gaze kept returning to the rifle, then to the shuttered window facing the East Ridge. Cobb's sighting confirmed his own fears. They were surrounded, waiting. The inaction was torture. He thought of Sarah's laughter, the way it used to fill this space, banishing shadows. Now, the shadows pressed in, heavy and malevolent. He touched the cold iron of the hammerhead. It was a tool for building, for mending. Soon, it might be a weapon for breaking. "You don't have to fight for me, Mr. Kane," Abigail said suddenly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. She stood by the cold hearth, the wooden horse clutched in her hand. I can leave. Try to slip away in the dark. Maybe draw them off." The words tasted like dust, but the thought of the children suffering because of her was unbearable. Elias stopped pacing. He looked at her, really looked at her. In the dim light of the single lamp, he saw the fear, yes, but also the dregs of defiance, the ember of the woman who'd spoken up for old man Peabody. He saw the shame warring with a desperate courage. He saw the burden she carried, not just of her body, but of her father's relentless cruelty. He thought of Sarah's quiet oath. "You don't leave someone to bleed." "Ain't about have to, Miss Hart," he said, his voice rough but steady. His gaze swept over his children. Ben tried to look brave. Lottie clinging to Abigail's skirt, Maisie sucking her thumb, wide-eyed. "They made it about us the minute they nailed that paper to my door. Turning you out now." He shook his head slowly. "That's just giving and what they want. Making us small." He picked up the rifle, checking the load with practiced hands. The click of the mechanism was loud in the stillness. We hold. We see what dawn brings. The night deepened, a velvet cloak studded with cold, indifferent stars. Sounds were magnified. The wind sighing through the sage, the distant cry of a night bird, the creak of the cabin timbers settling. Elias sat sentry by the door, the rifle across his lap. Abigail sat near the children, Lottie's head eventually drooping onto her lap in restless sleep. The wooden horse held tight in the girl's small fist. The shared vigil, the fragile trust, was a thin cord holding together against the crushing dark. It was near midnight when the dog started. Not the mournful howl of coyotes, but the frantic, savage baying of hounds. The sound ripped through the stillness, shattering the fragile peace. It came from the east, growing louder, closer, a chilling chorus of pursuit. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle to his shoulder, peering through a crack in the shutter. Abigail's blood ran cold. The children jolted awake, Maisie crying out in terror. The baying wasn't random. It was focused, driving relentlessly towards a homestead. And above the canine frenzy, riding hard and fast, outlined against the star-strewn sky as they crested the near rise, were the unmistakable shapes of horsemen. 3 of them. The moonlight glinted coldly on a deputy's badge pinned to the lead rider's chest. Hail! And he hadn't come for dawn. He'd come for blood, under cover of darkness, with the hounds running point. The time for waiting, for fragile hope, was over. The law, Silas Hart's law, had arrived at Elias Kane's door. And it wasn't knocking this time. The baying of the hounds wasn't just sound. It was a physical force, a wave of feral hunger crashing against the fragile walls of the cabin. It filled the night, shredding the thin veil of safety, turning the air thick with the scent of panic and damp fur. Deputy Hale and his riders, silhouettes sharp as cutouts against the star-dusted sky, reined in on a rise overlooking the homestead. The moonlight gleamed coldly on Hale's badge, turning it into a malevolent eye. Elias Kane didn't flinch. The cold dread that had gripped him at the note's discovery crystallized into a hard, focused resolve. He slammed the viewing slit and the shutter closed. Ben, bar the door. His voice cut through the children's whimpers, sharp as a blacksmith's chisel. Lottie, Maisie, under the table. Now! He snatched up the rifle, the familiar weight of grim comfort. Abigail stood frozen for a heartbeat, the carved wooden horse biting into her palm, the savage chorus outside mirroring the frantic drumming in her chest. This was it, brought down by hounds like vermin. Shame threatened to swamp her, the old familiar tide. But then Lottie's small hand grasped hers, cold and trembling. The child's terror, palpable and pure, ignited something else, a fierce, protective anger hotter than any forge. "Move!" Elias barked, not unkindly, but urgent. He grabbed a sack of seed corn, heaving it against the already barred door. Abigail sprang into action, her large frame surprisingly swift. She grabbed another sack, adding her weight to the barricade. Ben, pale but determined, shoved the heavy table toward the door, his small muscles straining. "Easy, boy," Elias murmured, helping him. "Make it tight." He met Abigail's eyes over Ben's head. In the dim lamplight, he saw no plea for mercy, only a steely determination that mirrored his own. She gave a curt nod. They were in this crucible together. Outside, Hale's voice sliced through the baying, amplified by the still night. "Cain, open up. Bring out the heart woman. You're harboring a fugitive. This is your last warning." Elias moved the shuttered window, facing the rise. Easing the viewing slid open just a crack. The three horsemen were clearly visible now. Hale in the center, Vance Ritter to his left, leering and restless on his horse, and a third man, thick-set, unfamiliar, likely one of Hale's hired toughs. The hounds, three lean, snarling shadows, strained against their leashes held by the third man, their muzzles pointed unerringly toward the cabin. "She ain't committed no crime, Hale." Elias called back, his voice carrying flat and hard. "You know it. This is Judge Hart's dirty work, not law." Hale's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. "The judge is the law in Iron Hollow, Cain. Disorderly conduct, public indecency, signed and sealed. Now hand her over, or we come and gettin' her, and it won't be pretty for you or them young uns." Vance Ritter whooped, firing his pistol wildly into the air. The sharp report echoed like a death knell. Maisie screamed, burying her face in Abigail's skirt. Abigail sank to her knees beside the table, pulling both girls close. "Hush now, little sparrow," she murmured, her own voice trembling only slightly. She wrapped her arms around them, creating a shield with her own body. "Hush, they're just making noise. Big, ugly noise." She began to hum, a tuneless, shaky vibration against Maisie's ear, a fragment of lullaby her mother Eleanor had sung during thunderstorms. "Hush, my dove, the thunder's roar cannot harm you anymore." The memory of her mother's calm voice, a lifeline from a time before her father's coldness froze everything, steadied her. She wouldn't let these men make these children small, not like her father tried with her. Ben crouched beside his father, the window slit, a rusty skinning knife clutched in his hand, his knuckles white. Elias placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a silent command to stay low, stay back. His mind raced. They couldn't hold the cabin against a determined assault. Hale had numbers, firepower, and the hounds to flush them out. His gaze darted to the cold forge outside, visible through another slit. An idea, desperate and dangerous, sparked. "Abigail," Elias hissed, keeping his eyes on the riders. "The forge, the big bellows handle. Can you?" Understanding flickered in her eyes. The bellows handle was heavy iron, as long as a man's arm. A crude club, but formidable in close quarters. She nodded, disentangling herself carefully from the clinging girls. "Lottie, watch Maisie. Stay right here." She crawled toward the back of the cabin where a small, shuttered opening faced the smithy. "Playing hidey-ho, Cain?" Hale taunted. "Won't help you. Vance, light him up. Smoke the rats out." Vance whooped again, sliding from his saddle. He grabbed a torch from a saddlebag, lighting it from a lucifer struck on his boot heel. The sudden flare of light painted his cruel features orange and black. He swaggered toward the cabin, aiming for the dry woodpile stacked near the wall. "No!" Ben cried out, surging forward. Elias yanked him back just as a rifle shot cracked from the rise. Hale shot. Splinters exploded from the door frame near Elias's head. He shoved Ben down hard. "Stay down!" Elias roared, raising his own rifle. He sighted on Vance, now perilously close to the woodpile. The torch held high. Elias squeezed the trigger. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Vance yelped, staggering back as the torch flew from his hand. Extinguished in the dirt, he clutched his arm, cursing violently. "You shot me, you bastard!" Vance screamed. "Next one's between your eyes, Ritter," Elias shouted, levering a fresh round into the chamber. His heart hammered against his ribs. He'd drawn blood. There was no turning back now. He thought of Sarah, her gentle hand soothing a fevered brow. What would she think of him now, rifle in hand, drawing a bead on another man, protecting? A fierce voice within him countered, protecting the innocent, like she would have. Hale's voice was icy with fury. "That's assault on an officer's deputy, Kane. You just earned yourself a rope alongside her. Boone, release the hounds. Get that door down." The thick-set man, Boone, unsnapped the leashes. With savage howls, the hounds launched themselves down the slope, a dark, snarling tide flowing toward the cabin. Abigail, reaching the back shutter, fumbled with the latch. Terror threatened to paralyze her. The baying was horrifyingly close. She forced the shutter open just enough to see the hounds, saliva flying, muscles bunching as they charged. Beyond them, Boone was dismounting, drawing a long knife, heading toward the front where Elias was. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy iron of the bellows handle. It felt solid, real. An anchor. She hefted it. The weight unfamiliar, but grounding. "Hold your head high, Abigail." Her mother's voice seemed to whisper, not from memory, but from the core of her being. "Don't let them make you small." She wasn't the girl tied to the wagon wheel anymore. She was a woman defending children. The hounds at the front of the cabin, like a battering ram of teeth and fury, throwing themselves against the door, claws scrabbling on the wood. The barricade shuddered. Elias fired through the slit, aiming low. One hound yelped, wounded, but the others redoubled their frenzy. Boone reached the door, starting to hack at the hinges with his knife. "Back door, Pa!" Ben yelled, pointing. One hound, smarter or more vicious, had circled and was now lunging at the small opening Abigail had made. Abigail didn't hesitate. As the snarling muzzle thrust through the gap, she swung the heavy iron bellows handle with all her strength. It connected with a sickening thud. The hound yelped, a high-pitched shriek of pain, and recoiled, whimpering. Abigail slammed the shutter closed, dropping the heavy bar across it. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her arms trembling from the effort and the adrenaline surge. She'd done it. She'd fought back. The momentary victory was shattered by the sound of splintering wood from the front. Boone's knife and the relentless hounds were weakening the door. Elias fired again, keeping Vance pinned down and Hale wary on the rise, but he couldn't stop Boone's determined assault. Lottie crawled over to Abigail, pressing the small white stone into her hand. "For luck," she whispered, her eyes huge with fear but also a flicker of awe at Abigail's defense. Abigail closed her fist around the stone, its smooth surface cool against her sweaty palm. The small gesture, a child's unwavering trust in the midst of hell, was a balm and a burden. She couldn't fail them. "Give it up, Kane." Hale bellowed, "You're finished. Hand her over, and maybe the judge shows mercy on your brats." "Mercy?" Elias spat the word like poison. "Like the mercy you showed her tied to Cobb's wagon? Like the mercy in that note threatening children?" He fired another shot towards Hale, forcing the deputy to duck. "You're not lawmen. Your heart's attack dogs." Hale straightened, his face contorted with rage. "You think this is just about her flapping mouth? About Ritter's pride?" He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "She's a thorn, Kane. A stubborn, inconvenient thorn in the judge's side. Always has been. But now she's the key. The key to clearing the last holdout on the valley land. Old man Peabody's parcel backs right onto Hart's new acquisition. And Peabody listens to her. Always has. With her shame discredited locked up, or better yet, silence permanent. Who's going to speak for that stubborn old fool when Hart makes his final offer, or when the accidents start happening? Hale's voice dripped with venomous triumph. Her little disorderly conduct. Perfect excuse to remove the problem. You just made yourself part of the cleanup. The revelation hit Elias like a physical blow. This wasn't just cruelty or control. It was cold, calculated greed. Silas Hart was using his own daughter's humiliation, amplifying it into criminal charges, to steal land. Abigail gasped, Hale's words confirming Jed Cobb's cryptic warning. Stirring things up, looking for an excuse. Something permanent. Her fight for old man Peabody hadn't just riled Vance. It had threatened her father's grand scheme. Her very existence was a roadblock. The betrayal cut deeper than any rope burn. Before Elias could respond, the weakened front door groaned under a final, massive impact from Boone and the remaining hounds. The barricade of sacks shifted. A hinge snapped with a sharp crack. The door buckled inwards, splintering around the lock. Now! Hale roared. Boone lunged to the gap. A dark, hulking shape silhouetted against the torchlight Hale had now lit and tossed near the doorway. Vance, clutching his bleeding arm, scrambled up behind him, pistol drawn, his face twisted with pain and malice. The surviving hound squeezed through, fangs bared, heading straight for the cowering children under the table. Time fractured. Elias swung his rifle toward Boone, but the big man was already inside, too close. Abigail, still clutching the bellows handle, surged forward from the back, placing herself bodily between the hound and the girls under the table. Ben screamed, raising his little knife uselessly towards Vance. Elias dropped the rifle, grabbing the heavy blacksmith's hammer from beside the hearth. He met Boone's charge with a roar, swinging the hammer in a short, brutal arc iron met flesh with a dull crunch. Boone grunted, staggering back, clutching his shoulder. Abigail swung the bellows handle at the hound, leaping towards Maisie. It connected, deflecting the beast, but not stopping it. It twisted, snarling, its jaws snapping inches from her leg. Vance, ignoring Elias and Boone, leveled his pistol straight at Abigail's broad back, exposed as she shielded the girls. His finger tightened on the trigger, a vicious snarl on his lips. This is for my arm, you fat bye. A shot rang out, but not from Vance's pistol. It came from outside, sharp and authoritative, cutting through the chaos. Vance Ritter jerked violently. A look of profound surprise crossed his face. His pistol clattered the floor as he crumpled forward, a dark stain blooming on his chest. He fell motionless onto the cabin's threshold. Silence, sudden and shocking, descended for a single, suspended heartbeat. Even the hound froze, confused. Everyone turned toward the doorway, where Vance Ritter lay dead. Standing beyond the shattered opening, framed by the flickering torchlight in the cold starlight, was a tall, imposing figure. He wore a long, dark coat, his face shadowed by a broad-brimmed hat, but the posture radiated absolute, chilling authority. In his hand, smoke still curling from the barrel, was a silver-chased revolver. Deputy Hale, still on the rise, stiffened, his face draining of color. Judge Hart. Silas Hart lowered his pistol, his gaze sweeping the scene inside the ruined cabin. The barricade, the wounded Boone groaning on the floor, Elias standing protectively over him with the hammer, the terrified children, and finally his daughter Abigail, still shielding the girls, the heavy iron handle held ready, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and defiance as they locked onto his own. The judge's expression was unreadable, a mass of granite in the uncertain light. He hadn't come to rescue his daughter. He'd come to witness the end. And he'd just killed one of his own men. Why? His voice, when it came, was colder than the Wyoming night, cutting through the stunned silence like a shard of ice. Deputy Hale, he stated, his eyes never leaving Abigail. Stand down. This requires a more personal touch. Silence, thick and brittle as thin ice, settled over the shattered cabin. The stench of gunpowder, blood, and fear hung heavy in the air, mingling with the damp scent of the night outside. Judge Silas Hart stood framed in the ruined doorway, Vance Ritter's body a dark, crumpled heap at his boots, his silver-chased revolver, smoke still wisping from its barrel, hung loosely at his side. His gaze, cold and assessing as a winter pond, swept the scene. The wounded Boone groaning on the rough-hewn floor, Elias Kane standing protectively over him, the blacksmith's hammer still clenched in his white-knuckled fist, the terrified children huddled on the table, and finally, his daughter Abigail. She remained crouched before the girls, the heavy iron bellows handle held like a staff of defiance, her chest heaving, her eyes wide pools of shock and a dawning, ferocious understanding as they locked onto her father's impassive face. Deputy Hale, still mounted on the rise, looked stunned, his hand hovering uncertainly near his holster. The surviving hound whined, confused, nosing at Vance's still form. Deputy Hale. Hart's voice cut the silence again, sharp and precise, devoid of any emotion stirred by the man he'd just killed. Stand down. Secure Boone. See to his wound. This requires a more personal touch. His eyes never left Abigail. The phrase, personal touch, hung in the air, colder than the night, laden with unspeakable possibilities. Elias shifted his weight, the hammer's familiar heft a grounding force against the surreal horror. He saw the calculation in Hart's eyes, the absolute control. Killing Vance hadn't been rage. It had been pruning, removing an unreliable, impulsive tool. A message, perhaps, to Hale and Boone. Disobedience or failure carried the ultimate price. His gaze flickered to the children, Maisie trembling violently against Abigail, Lottie's small face pale as parchment, Ben staring with haunted eyes at the dead man. Protect them. The thought was a drumbeat in his skull, louder than his own thudding heart. Sarah's face surfaced in his memory, not frail and fading, but vibrant, her eyes alight with fierce compassion. You see someone hurting, Elias Kane. You don't leave them to bleed. He hadn't left Abigail to bleed. Now, he couldn't leave these children to the judge's personal touch. Abigail slowly rose to her full height, the movement deliberate, pushing back the crushing weight of shame that had defined her existence. The raw terror was still there, a live wire beneath her skin, but was overlaid now by a burning clarity. Hale's shouted revelation, the key to clearing the last holdout, Old Man Peabody's silence permanent, echoed, illuminating years of her father's cold disdain. It wasn't just her size, her voice, it was her inconvenient conscience, her refusal to be silenced when she saw injustice, especially toward the vulnerable like Peabody. Her mother's locket seemed to burn against her skin, beneath her dress. Eleanor Hart's final, rasping words surfaced, not as a whisper, but as a command. Hold your head high, Abigail. Don't you ever let them make you small. Not for him. She squared her shoulders, meeting her father's gaze with steadiness she didn't know she possessed. The bellows handle felt less like a weapon now, more like a symbol of the strength she'd found defending others. Personal, father? Abigail's voice, though shaky, carried across the ruined room. It was the first time she directly addressed him since her rescue. Like having me tied to a wagon wheel, like sending your dogs to tear apart a homestead with children inside, like her voice hitched, gesturing towards Vance's body. Like this? A flicker, minute, and quickly extinguished, passed over Silas Hart's granite features. Annoyance? Or something colder? Sentiment clouds judgment, Abigail, he stated, his tone chillingly reminiscent of his dismissal years ago in his study. He took a single step inside, his polished boots avoiding the pooling blood. You forced this escalation. Your indiscretions provided the necessary leverage. Peabody's land is essential. The Railroad Consortium requires a clear title. His sentimental attachment, fueled by your interference, was an obstacle. He spoke as if discussing a problematic legal brief, not his daughter's life. Your public defiance necessitated a public correction. Your flight, aided by this blacksmith, his gaze flicked dismissively to Elias, transformed correction into criminality, harboring a fugitive. He gestured vaguely towards a crumpled note Elias still carried. The law is clear. Your law. Elias growled, stepping forward, placing himself slightly in front of Abigail and the children. The hammer felt suddenly light, ready. Law, you twist like a snake. You sent men to burn us out, to set hounds on children. You killed your own man. That ain't law, Hart. That's murder and tyranny. Hart's eyes narrowed. Vance Ritter discharged his weapon recklessly in a confined space, endangering minors. I acted to preserve life. The lie was delivered with absolute conviction. He looked back at Abigail. Your theatrics end now, daughter. You will return to Iron Hollow. Face the charges. Accept the court's judgment. His meaning was clear. Imprisonment discrediting, silencing, or worse, personal touch. No, the word was quiet but absolute. Abigail didn't shout. She simply stated it, her gaze unwavering from her father's, the defiance that had gotten her tied to the wagon wheel, that had spoken for Peabody, now solidified into an unbreakable resolve. I won't go back to be your pawn, or your sacrifice for land. She glanced down at Lottie and Maisie, still clinging to her legs. Lottie looked up, her dark eyes wide but no longer filled with pure terror. There was a spark of something else. Awe, perhaps, at Abigail's defiance. Abigail gently touched the girl's hair. You don't get to decide my place anymore, or threaten these people. Hart's composure finally cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. You defy me? Here? Now? His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the revolver. Elias shifted again, the movement drawing Hart's predatory gaze. She ain't alone, Hart. He raised the hammer, not as a threat, but as a statement. You took one step into my home uninvited. Take another towards her or these children, and we'll see how personal this touch really gets. His voice was low, gravelly, but resonated with a quiet, deadly certainty forged in grief and a fierce love for his family. He thought of Sarah, not with paralyzing sorrow now, but with a fierce determination to embody the protective strength she'd always believed he possessed. The standoff stretched, thick and suffocating. Hale had dismounted, helping the groaning Boone to his feet outside, his movements hesitant, his eyes darting nervously between the judge and the defiant group in the cabin. The implications of Vance's death, of the judge's cold calculus, were settling on him. Hart's eyes flickered between Elias's resolute stance, the hammer held ready, and Abigail's unyielding posture shielding the children. He saw the raw fear on the young faces, but also the dawning comprehension of his cruelty. He saw the shattered door, the evidence of the violent assault he'd sanctioned. He saw the dead man at his feet, killed by his own hand. The pristine, controlled narrative he constructed was fracturing, publicly storming a homestead and killing a defiant blacksmith after murdering his own deputy. Even his influence might not weather that storm, especially if Elias and Abigail lived to tell the tale. The Railroad Consortium valued discretion. A cold, calculating light replaced a momentary fury in Hart's eyes. The personal touch shifted from physical removal to strategic retreat. His reputation, his grand plan, were still salvageable. Abigail discredited and imprisoned would still serve his purpose with Peabody. This messy scene could be contained, blamed on Ritter's rashness and Kane's lawlessness. Very well. Hart's voice was ice-scraping stone. He holstered his revolver with deliberate slowness. Your defiance is noted, Kane, and yours, Abigail, is regrettably predictable. He took a step back over Vance's body into the torchlit yard. This matter is not concluded. The law will have its due. You are still a fugitive. Harboring her remains a hanging offense. He turned his gaze on Hale. Deputy, secure the prisoner Boone. Retrieve Vance's body. We return to Iron Hollow. Now. But Judge, Hale stammered, gesturing toward the cabin. He shot Vance first, and she... Now, Deputy. Hart's command cracked like a whip. The scene speaks for itself. Vance acted recklessly. Cain resisted lawful arrest. We will reassess. He mounted his waiting horse with fluid grace, not sparing another glance for his daughter or the ruined home. Justice, he stated, the word hollow in the pre-dawn stillness, merely requires patience. Hale, shaken and confused, hurriedly helped the wounded Boone onto his horse, then struggled to heave Vance's body over his own saddle. The surviving hound, cowed, slunk after them. Within minutes, the torches were extinguished, the hoofbeats fading into the vastness, leaving only the scent of blood, smoke, and a chilling emptiness. The tension didn't leave Elias's body. It transmuted into a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He lowered the hammer slowly, his arms trembling. Abigail sank to her knees, the bellows handle clattering to the floor. She pulled Lottie and Maisie into a tight embrace, burying her face in their hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of relief and residual terror. Ben stumbled to his father's side, burying his face in Elias's shirt, his small body trembling. Dawn was bleeding into the eastern sky, pale streaks of pink and gold staining the bruised purple. It illuminated the wreckage, the splintered door, the bloodstains on the floor, the scattered sacks, the cold forge outside. It also illuminated the small group huddled together amidst the ruin, a widowed blacksmith, his 3 motherless children, and the judge's defiant daughter. Elias placed a hand on Ben's head, his gaze meeting Abigail's over children. Her eyes, red-rimmed but dry now, held a mixture of profound gratitude and shared, weary understanding. The shame that had hunched her shoulders seemed diminished, replaced by a quiet, hard-won dignity. She touched a hidden locket at her throat, a silent tribute to her mother's enduring strength. Lottie wriggled free from Abigail's embrace. She picked up the small white river stone from where it had fallen near the bellows handle. Without a word, she pressed it back into Abigail's hand, closed her fingers over it. Then she reached out and took Ben's hand. Maisie, sensing the shift, clung to Abigail's skirt with one hand and reached for Elias's worn trousers with the other. The simple, unspoken gesture, the children linking them together, was more powerful than any words. They were bound now, not by blood, but by shared terror, shared defiance, and the fragile, fierce protection they had offered one another in the crucible of the night. They were a bulwark against the harshness of the world, however temporary. "They'll be back," Elias said quietly, his voice rough. His gaze swept the vulnerable homestead. Hart won't let this stand. Not for long. The threat hadn't vanished. It had merely retreated to regroup. Iron Hollow's malice still pulsed on the horizon. Abigail looked down at the white stone in her palm, then at the children clinging to her and Elias. She thought of her father's cold eyes, his absolute conviction in his own corrupted law. She thought of Peabody, alone and vulnerable. Then she looked at Elias, his face etched with grief and exhaustion, but also with resolve that hadn't been there before Sarah's death. He'd found a reason to stand tall again, even in the ruins. "I know," Abigail said, her voice surprisingly steady. She looked toward the open doorway, beyond the blood-stained threshold, to the vast, awakening plain stretching towards the distant mountains, painted gold by the rising sun. The future was terrifyingly uncertain, a landscape of potential danger and hardship. But she wasn't tied to a wagon wheel anymore. She wasn't alone. "So we don't stay." Elias followed her gaze. Leaving the homestead, the last tangible connection to Sarah, was a fresh wound. But staying was a death sentence to them all. He saw Sarah's face again, not in sorrow, but smiling, nodding approvingly at the circle of protection formed around the children. You don't leave someone to bleed. They had stopped the bleeding tonight. Now, they had to find a way to heal. He nodded slowly, a decision settling in his weary bones. He squeezed Ben's shoulder, then placed his large, callous hand gently over Lottie's small one where it rested on Abigail's arm, completing the circle. "We don't stay," he agreed, his voice a low rumble. "Come first light, we move." Silence descended again, but it was different now. Not the brittle silence of terror, but the deep, weary quiet after the storm. They sat amidst the wreckage of the cabin and the remnants of their old lives. The children nestled close, Abigail clutching a small white stone, Elias's hand resting protectively over theirs. The first true rays of sunlight streamed through the shattered doorway, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like fragile promises. It warmed the bloodstains on the floor, turning them the color of rust. Outside, the vast, unforgiving beauty of Wyoming stretched out, indifferent to their small, hard-won victory and the long, uncertain road ahead. They had faced the judge's personal touch and survived. They had found each other. For now, in the fragile sanctuary of the dawn, that had to be enough. The forge of their resilience had been tested in the harshest fire, and somehow, against all odds, they hadn't broken. They had bent, they had scarred, but they held. Together,